You will never consistently outperform your self-image. It doesn't matter the thoughts that you have, the actions that you take, the emotions that you experience, or the opportunities that you get presented to you. The only thing that really matters is how you see yourself. This work was started by a guy named Maxwell Maltz. He wrote a book called Psycho-Cybernetics, and the whole premise behind that book came from the stance that he was a plastic surgeon. I believe it was in the 20s. I've read it like 5 or 6 times. And he was fixing all these people. They had like a cleft lip, or they had some deformity, or they just didn't feel beautiful. They came to him wanting him to fix them. He did. He made them look aesthetically beautiful. They'd look in the mirror and they still wouldn't see or feel a difference. And this led Maxwell Maltz to the belief and the understanding that people will not perform and exceed the way they see themselves. It's all an internal job, and ultimately the internal is what leads to the external. I ended up having a conversation with a client today that had these major internal shifts going through our process, and all of a sudden, like, he lost 15 pounds. And so most of our clients are business owners, but this applies to any area of your life, whether it's weight loss, whether it's to growing your business, whether it's to sports and athletics, or sales performance inside of your team. And on this video, I want to walk you through exactly what this is all about and what Maxwell Maltz really discovered way back then, and now how we can apply it to a century later, because it all has sound principles, but a lot of people have a hard time understanding because it is a semi-complex topic, and something that I love to do is to simplify these complex topics so that you can go out there and implement it, so that you can have lasting change that can actually help you succeed on an ongoing basis. What's up, guys? My name is Nico Arapklis. So pumped to have you here on this channel. If this is your first time here, we're so excited to have you. We talk all about mindset and the inner work, and more so what we like to call is the body work, because mindset alone is not going to change anything either. And also on the flip side, action alone is not going to change anything as well. So let's dive into all this and how you can really start utilizing the stuff that Maxwell Maltz invented and discovered and apply it to where we are today, so that you can, again, get the most lasting results. Okay. So I want to share a quick little story about where all this came from for me. So when I was younger, I played baseball, and it was my everything. I loved it so much. I practiced it all the time, and I just learned it from a very young age, and I got pretty good at it. And so I ended up making the varsity team as a sophomore, which was semi-uncommon, especially when I beat out a senior that started the year prior and was one of the better players on the team. So what ended up happening is we got second in the state that year, and it was an amazing run. We were kind of all surprised that it happened, but that planted the belief that we could win the state championship because we got second and we were only sophomores. What would happen if we were juniors or seniors? Maybe we could even win the next 2 years, is what we thought. And so every single year after that sophomore year, what did we do? Well, we were weightlifting in the mornings, we were practicing in the afternoons, and we were hanging out with each other all the time, us and our teammates, right? And what was interesting is that, we had a good, fun experience with each other. We were all pretty good friends. We would give each other hard times. We would banter with each other. But there was one thing that trumped everything else, and that was that we were going to win state. And it wasn't even the fact that we were going to win state. It was that we were going to be state champions. And I want you to understand the dichotomy here, okay? Because this is exactly what Maxwell Maltz was talking about. Most people set goals, or they do affirmations, and they say, like, this is where we're going. This is what we want to accomplish. And that's great and all. And they've done countless studies to show that that increases the likelihood of exceeding and attaining those goals. But again, there's something that's far greater that just trumps everything else. Okay. So while everyone else is in the personal development space and they're setting goals and writing affirmations, like, that stuff is great. But I'm always looking for something that's more long lasting. And that's what we were doing with our baseball team. And so what we did is we decided, as opposed to, hey, we want to win the state championship, or we want to win a bunch of games, or we want to be one of the best teams in the state, we just simply said, we are state champions. It's an identity versus an outcome. Okay. It's another writer down here. Identity, as opposed to outcomes. We decided that we were going to be state champions. Okay, we decided that that is how we were going to see ourselves. And again, coming back to the quote that I said at the very beginning of this video, you will not consistently outperform the way you see yourself, your self-image, okay, your identity. So we chose as a collective group to decide that our new identity was state champions. And we got to experience it, and we had that visceral experience. So close to it. Our sophomore year, we lost by just a couple runs to a really good team in the state. And so we saw like we weren't that far off. We could actually win that. And we saw it, we felt it, we understood it, and we internalized it because we're like, we're coming back and we're going to win. That's what's going to happen, right? So then we just decided, all right, we are going to be state champions. We are state champions, okay? So every time we would get together, every time we'd meet, we'd talk about that stuff. We talk about how we won state championship, and we just talk, and we started operating from that lens that we are state champions. And what this actually does is something that's so foundational and grounded that allows us to just be a fence post when everyone else is being a leaf in the wind. When the fence post is dug deep in there, you can't shake it, you can't move it. When a leaf is in the wind, it just flies all over the place. So if you want to have a more stronger foundational sense, like a post that's in the ground that can't be moved when the wind comes, as opposed to a leaf, then I strongly encourage you take this type of concept to whatever it is that you want to create in your life. Fast forward, we ended up winning the state championship our senior year. And it all became because it all came from the fact that we were operating from state champions since the time that we lost the state championship at our sophomore year. So with that being said, is like, why does this happen? Well, it's because of the fact that then we start seeing things through the lens of state champions. We start thinking the thoughts of state champions. We start acting from a state championships mindset. We start taking the deliberate steps. We start talking to each other in a way that state champions talk to each other. It's foundational and it's just immersive because we just see ourselves as that person, right? And I want you to think about it like this. I was putting together a bit of a presentation that I'm doing for a bunch of musical artists. And I started thinking about this, and I wanted to go do some research and find out, all the different mainstream artists that became famous and what did they do before they actually became these mainstream artists, and what was really the breakthrough internally before the breakthrough externally in their career. There was always an internal shift. There was always an internal breakthrough. You look at someone like Lady Gaga. She had $35. She came into New York City. She told the cab driver to go to where everyone is at, Central Times Square, right? She saw herself as this person before she was actually Lady Gaga. Her name wasn't even Lady Gaga at that point, but she made a decision on the identity that she was going to be Lady Gaga and this superstar before her career actually took off. It was the same thing with Freddie Mercury. He said he was going to be this legend, not just a musician, but a legend. And he decided that he was going to be Freddie Mercury, changed his name, changed his identity to believe that that is who he was going to be before he was actually that person. He decided on the identity because when he decided on the identity, then he decided that he would start operating like that person. He would start thinking like that person. He would start behaving like that person. He would start communicating like that person. And eventually, because he had that internal shift, he would have the external shift. It all came down to the identity. Think about Eminem, right? He was Marshall Mathers, or Marshall just in the beginning, Marshall Mathers. It wasn't until he made the shift into Slim Shady and Eminem, and he decided that was his new identity, so he could start thinking like that person, so he could start acting like that person, start communicating, start singing, start rapping, rapping, so that he really had that identity that he was that person, right? So you can see from there's countless examples and examples of this that I haven't even mentioned, but those are a small sample size, and that's what came from our story within baseball. I started applying that into my business career as well, where I made this document. It was called Alchemy of Self, and instead of saying because I really wanted to be a YouTube advertiser, for whatever reason I took a liking to that. I took some time to really think on that. I started advertising a little bit. I gravitated towards it. And then instead of being oh, I want to get that person as a client, I want to get that company as a client, I decided I am the best YouTube advertiser on the planet. That's what the statement was. And I read that to myself every single day. So it was an identity, because once I started thinking about I'm the best YouTube advertiser on the planet, I start thinking like the best YouTube advertiser on the planet. I start operating, I start communicating on sales calls. People like could feel my energy. I'm like, and I told them that I'm going to be the best YouTube advertiser on the planet. And I'm not going to get there by not absolutely excelling for my clients. And they could feel that. And there was people that would sign up with me, even though they were talking to agencies that were 100 times bigger than me. And I was just starting out. And it all came from the identity. I could communicate from that because it was a chosen identity. But here's the thing, is you have to think about this from a neurological level. I made a post on my Instagram that I showed on a previous YouTube video that you feel free to go check out. But it was a microscopic view of these neural pathways inside of your brain and what happens when you repeat these type of identities inside of your brain. It'll show these neural connections where they're over here, and basically think about it like this, like I'm an artist versus like I'm a 9-to-5er, I'm a side gigging artist, right? And when you really identify, and I'm going to share with you how we take everyone through, and this is the best practice that you can do that takes less than 10 minutes to really to set up that new identity. Because if you're separated, I'm a side gigger versus I'm a full-time artist, they're separated. But when you practice them and you repeat them, you practice and repeat them, and you install this identity into your subconscious and your nervous system, every single rep, all of a sudden, boom, it collects, it makes that connection. And then that's when the identity is formed, because you actually believe it. And then that's when you actually start operating from that identity. Because again, coming back to the thing that we talked about, people set goals and they do affirmations, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you got to think about it is like, you got to give yourself the best opportunity to install that new identity into you so that you can make that neural connection that we see from a microscopic level. We can see that neural connection. That's when the identity is formed, and that's when you'll start operating as that new person. Just again, like Lady Gaga, like Eminem, like Freddie Mercury. At one point, they saw themselves as regular Joe Schmo, and then here was Freddie Mercury. And until those two collided and became the same exact person, they weren't going to operate like that person, and therefore they wouldn't actually become that person in their career, right? So again, Marshall Mathers, Eminem, until those two collided and became one person, he wasn't going to operate and communicate and rap in the way that was required for him to have his career take off. So the question that begs here is that how do you actually make those neural connections? Well, I want to give you basically a few different ways on how you can do that. Now, I know I talked about affirmations, and I'm not throwing shade on affirmations. I think the thing that a lot of people do is they will set goals and they'll do affirmations and they'll read books and they'll do different things, but they won't stay consistent with it, because that's the problem. Really, when you really boil it down, that is the problem. Is they don't stay consistent and persistent with it, because you have to reinforce that identity over and over and over and over again. And there's different ways to reinforce that identity, but the real key here is you have to reinforce the identity over and over and over and over and over again until you truly believe it, because that is when the neural connections are connected, and then you just start operating like that actual person. Okay, so how do we actually do that? How do we reinforce that identity? Well, there's a few different routes, but again, you have to understand from a neurological level, that connection has to happen in order for you to actually start operating like that person, and therefore become that person in your career, right? And that's what we did in baseball, okay? So a few of the ways, right? Affirmations are great, but you have to speak them out with enthusiasm, conviction, and power. Okay, we can write things down, we can speak them, we can listen to them, but when you combine all of those, all the different modalities, that's when it sinks in deeper, that's when it sinks in quicker. And that's the key. Repetitions that are quicker and with more depth. So if you can just have more reps, and you can have those reps be more depth so they can be stronger, that's the winning combination. Okay, so we'll talk about how we can increase our reps with less time, and then we'll talk about how we can increase the depth with less time. Because again, if we can increase the amount of reps and the amount of depth in the shortest amount of time, that's where you're going to actually start stepping into that identity in a much quicker way. Okay, again, coming back to affirmations, there's nothing wrong with affirmations. They just can take some time, right? And unless you're consistent with those reps, it's just going to take a long time, right? And then most people quit because they don't see the results, and then therefore they think that it doesn't work, and therefore it doesn't because they don't stay with it, okay? So the biggest thing that I can just hammer home is that it's the consistency and it's the depth in the shortest amount of time that's going to help you really reinforce this whole new identity, okay? So one of my favorite things is visualization. Why? Well, it's because of the fact that, again, I come back to baseball right at the tail end of my career. I was thinking about this the other day, is I really got deep into meditation again. I had waves of meditation or visualization in baseball, but it was my final games that I was playing, I had hit a lull in the season where I just kind of struggled. And then I just said, all right, I'm going all in. I visualized every night before I went to bed, every day as I woke up. Those are two very important times. I'll explain why, but I did that over and over and over and over again. In my last tournament, I was just rocketing balls. I was hitting them off the fence, double, triple, home run. I couldn't miss. People were like, how are you doing this? This is a stark difference from where you were, even just a couple weeks ago. And it's crazy how this happens. But why does this happen? Well, it's because our mind cannot differentiate what is real and what is vividly imagined. Another writer-downer. The mind cannot differentiate what is real and what's vividly imagined. So let's talk about this. What is real? Okay, I was hitting home runs. That is a rep. Okay, that is a rep that's showing me that I am being this person. I remember that when I was playing in junior college, I decided that I wanted to be a Division I baseball player. And so I would operate like that. I would make that decision and I would choose to be a Division I baseball player. It ended up happening. Awesome. Funny how this stuff works, right? But I chose that. And every time I choose that and I experience it out in real life where I'm a D1 baseball player hitting balls off the fence, like that is a rep, right? But again, coming back to our quote is the mind cannot differentiate what is real and what's vividly imagined. And what we talked about before is like how can we get the most amount of reps in the shortest amount of time? If I wanted to get 100 reps hitting a ball off the fence, I would have to play at least 100 games, likely at least 50. Like if I'm going to be hitting a ball off the fence every game, then I would have to play 50 games to get 100 reps. But what if there was a way that I could get 100 reps in a night? And that's exactly what I did, because again, the mind cannot differentiate what is real and what is vividly imagined. So I would just visualize myself hitting balls off the fence 100 times, 500 times, sometimes 1,000 times in one night as I'm going to bed, because that is when my subconscious is the most open and it's the most receptive. And the reason I share that is because that's where the depth comes in. If we can do it at the right times and visualize at the right times, then it's going deeper in addition to the amount of reps. So we're getting the amount of reps that we want and we're getting the depth of the reps, meaning it's going deeper into our subconscious. It's making those neural connections tighter and it's making them actually connect on a quicker rate, right? So it checks off both the boxes there. So, and then I talked about before is like when I would wake up first thing in the morning, I would visualize home run, home run, home run, home run, home run off the fence, keep playing. Like I virtually like in one night got, sometimes like 500 to 1,000 reps of me just rocketing balls. And then I go play and I have 4 at bats. I go 4 for 4 with, a few home runs and a walk-off hit. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And I was like, yeah, it was. But at the same time, I was like, I went like 600 for 600 last night and it was so much better, right? And so this takes practice. You'll get better as you do it over and over and over again. But you have to do that. And the cool thing, and we'll talk a little bit more about the depth here, is that the more emotional that you can make it, the more visceral, the more sensatory it is, the better it is, the more depth it is. Coming back to my baseball conversation about we got second place, that was very emotional, right? We experienced it, we felt the emotions, but we can recreate that if you really just go into your mind and you keep getting better and better at this. Right? It's a practice, it's a muscle that you have to keep on building. But the more emotion that you can bring in, the more depth that comes in. So if you can get it emotionalized and you can have massive reps and you do it at the right times, in the mornings, at the nights, when your subconscious is the most open and receptive to anchor in that new identity, that's when it becomes like rocket fuel, right? And on top of that, how do we draw more emotion? Well, there's a few ways that I recommend. One is to do story-based. So what I love to do, and this is what we do inside of Vision Espresso, is we create story-based audios that are based on people's visions, on what their identity that they want to create. We help them pull all that out of them, and then we create a custom audio from their future self in their own voice that has emotional frequencies underneath it. So like, we've built this whole system because we understand the science, the psychology, and we just built it into a system that makes it easier. Like, I wish I would have had this 20 years ago when I was playing baseball, but that's why I built it. And all these athletes and teams and sales organizations and entrepreneurs and artists, like, all this is the same, but it's just like, it became hard for me when I was playing because I wasn't very consistent, because I didn't have that identity that I was consistent yet. I still had this identity of like, oh, I'm inconsistent. I do it sometimes. I do it when it's convenient. I do it when I fall off. Like, until I rebuilt that identity that I am the type of person that just stays consistent over and over and over, it wasn't going to happen. So that was the identity that I needed to reinforce. And once I do that, then I was just capable to reinforce and stay disciplined with anything. Okay? So if you can really master this principle and this approach to whatever you want to do, whether it's, lighting up your business, whether it's, losing weight, whether it's becoming an artist, whether it's becoming the best business owner and running a Fortune 500 company, whatever it is, you have to become that person. You have to become that identity before you actually have the career shift, because you start operating from that lens. You start communicating, you start thinking, you start just being that person where it's undeniable. And then the internal shift obviously leads to the external shift. Okay. So that's the rundown. I mean, visualization is literally everything, because it's the expedited path. It's the deeply emotional path. As you get better at telling stories, you use emotional language is really powerful. You use even sound and vibration and music, like that adds layers of emotion. And if you can get to the point where you're literally feeling emotions come out of you as you're visualizing, that's when the game changes. Because once I started like getting chills when I would visualize, when I would get even tears when I would visualize, that's when you've changed the game. It only comes from a lot of practice or using tools like what we have that just expedites and makes it easier. So that's really the rundown. And if you want to learn more information about Vision Espresso, we start everyone on the Vision quiz. It's about a 20-minute quiz that'll help you really clarify what is it that you do want to visualize, because that's what we've discovered for working on this stuff for as a company 6 years. We've talked and worked with hundreds and hundreds of business owners and entrepreneurs and athletes at this point, and it all comes down to really getting good at this stuff. But until you get good at it, you really need a system that can help you do that. So most people don't even know what they want. They don't know what they want to visualize. And so that's what the Vision Quiz is all about. You got to figure out what you want. We've literally boiled it down to an art, and a science takes less than 20 minutes. Some people have increased their clarity by up to 108% in less than 20 minutes. So feel free to go check it out. The link's down in the description. I appreciate you guys. Make sure and go watch the last video that I did on Maxwell Maltz talking about the book. I'll probably make another one. So let me know down in the comments what you got most out of this video, and then also what kind of content you guys want moving forward, and what kind of topics you want me to dive even deeper on in terms of the self-image psychology and becoming the best version of yourself so you can experience the life, the business, the everything external that you want. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you on the next one.